Hello again, everybody. My name is Natalie Radu, and I'm the Associate Director of iGrow News, a one-stop shop for all of the latest news in vertical farming and indoor ag. I also make documentaries as Nat Radley on YouTube about hydroponics and everything else related. I'm really excited to be emceeing this webinar today. Thank you to Huffster by Verde Compacto for coordinating this event. Today, we'll be diving into the present and future of vertical farming and its potential to positively impact food security on a global scale. Feel free to drop questions in the chat as you have them. We will be addressing questions at the very end of the webinar as an open panel with all of the speakers. First up, we have my colleague Sepra Achard. After gaining experience through various projects and startups, Sepra Achard joined iGrow News in August 2021 to become the company's new CEO. Since joining, he further developed the website to meet industry and readers' demands by providing unbiased news and analysis regarding the indoor vertical farming industry. Today, he'll be providing an overview on the world of vertical farming.
Thank you, Natalie, for presenting. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Start the presentation. Shoot. Yeah, so good morning and good afternoon for everyone. So yes, today I'm going to give an overview of the vertical farming industry. Before that, I'm going to define vertical farming for those folks out there that are not familiar with vertical farming or may get confused between vertical farming, controlled environment agriculture, and the different purposes it has. And then we will dig deep into the overview. We're going to give an overview of the vertical farming industry, give latest trends that we have been seeing in this industry in the past months. And finally, we're going to get through the different challenges that we can see in this industry. So first, what do we define as vertical farming? So vertical farming can be considered as a segment of controlled environment agriculture, which is the umbrella term. Vertical farming can come in different formats. It can be stacked layers, as you can see in the top right, where you got different levels of produce and several levels of produce that are grown, or literal walls of greens that grow vertically, like you can see here. It can be used in different environments, such as within a repurposed building. It can be used in greenhouses, warehouses, shipping containers. It can be integrated within skyscrapers, among other forms. So we can grow various crops. Up to now, what we have seen is that most vertical farming operators have grown leafy greens, different types of aromatics, berries, vegetables or fruits such as tomatoes, cucumbers, chilies, different flowers, both edible and ornamental. We're seeing also some vertical farming operators contributing to reforestation through tree sprouts. And it can literally be grown anywhere in urban areas as well as peri-urban areas, in rural areas, and in very remote areas such as the Arctic and potentially the space, where we're seeing a lot of projects and research that could integrate in the future vertical farms in future missions on the moon and on Mars. So now we're going to give an overview of the sector. So we're going to go through all the investments. We're going to give a heat map of all the what we're seeing in the vertical farming sector and the latest trends. So what the least we can say is that since the pandemic, vertical farming has been growing worldwide. In 2020, we've seen a huge increase in investments, as you can see in the graph here. According to PitchBook data, venture capitalists, or VCs, have invested about $1.17 billion across 66 funding rounds. In 2021, across 74 funding rounds, they've invested 1.19, and now in 2022, up to June, They've invested already $1.2 billion across 34 deals. However, 2022 has been marked by several very important funding rounds, notably the Plenty's $400 million funding round. Overall, the market is expected to grow and reach up to $20 billion by 2026, according to the latest Statista reports on vertical farming. However, that report has been done in 2021, so we can expect the vertical farming to go beyond $20 billion by that time. We're seeing also a lot of governments actively investing in vertical farming. Food security being an issue, global supply chain disruptions, the war in Russia, all the disruptions that we're witnessing in the global economy is forcing a lot of governments to take actions and to invest. In the USA, for instance, through the USDA, there are different grants available for urban farmers or new technology adoption. They've recently announced a $43 million grant to support urban agriculture. We're also seeing several states investing in vertical farming facilities and or taking part in funding rounds led by certain companies. There are states like Georgia, Kentucky, Montana, Pennsylvania, Texas, Massachusetts, and so on. Other countries include the UAE, so the United Arab Emirates. Recently, the ADAFSA, so Abu Dhabi Agriculture and Food Safety Authority, awarded 2 contracts worth $84 million. They plan on building the world's largest vertical farm near the Dubai Expo sites. And there's a lot of state-owned venture capital that have taken part in various funding rounds from vertical farming companies throughout the world, not just in the United States, not just in North America, in Europe, we've seen in Asia as well. There are a lot of investments that are made. Other countries include Saudi Arabia, KSA. The Minister of Environment, Water and Agriculture has recently awarded a $27 million budget for vertical farming technology adoption throughout the country. There are other projects such as NEOM, which is one of the largest redevelopment projects worth $500 billion that plans on including vertical farming. They've also taken part in various funding rounds. You also got Qatar, who's taken part in the latest funding round of Inform in December 2021. And there are several projects that are currently underway in the country ahead of the Football World Cup, or as our American friends call it, the soccer. You also have, so this is not an exhaustive list. There are other countries, but for the sake of time and clarity, we've restricted to these 4 countries. Other countries can be the United Kingdom and Scotland. There are a lot of projects currently underway and investments made by the governments. There's the Baltic region, Southeast Asia, and so on. So from our database, we've been able to create a sort of heat map from all the news that we receive and kind of locate where does it come from. So obviously, the bigger the circle is, the more active the region is. So we can see that North America and Europe has been by far leading recent news. Middle East as well, East Asia, Southeast Asia, so countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Korea, China, Japan, they're all investing in vertical farming. We're seeing projects as well in Australia and New Zealand. Recently, there's been a 39 million Series B funding round in Australia. We're seeing also countries in Latin America, South America, where there are a lot of projects currently underway. Now, this heat map doesn't mean that, for instance, in regions like Africa or in Russia, there is no vertical farming projects. It's just that they're not publicized or publicized enough, or there are currently talks to initiate vertical farming projects. So what about vertical farming today? So in the past 6 months, we've been able to gather a lot of data from the industry, and we've compiled some trends, and we've been able to exploit some trends regarding this industry. Yeah, so since the start of the year, vertical farming operators have on average doubled their facility surface sizes and the number of facilities they operate. This doesn't mean, just to clarify everything, that all vertical farms have doubled their sizes. No, it means that the vertical farms that have announced an expansion have on average doubled their sizes or their facility. On the stock market side, as there are a lot of and an increasing number of vertical farming publicly traded stocks, we've seen financial institutions as well as mutual funds buying more shares and furthering their positions in certain of their stocks. Despite companies posting worse than expected financial results, as well as analysts giving negative opinions about vertical farming. Despite all of that, the overall behavior is buy. And also, as stated earlier, we've seen that there's been a $1.2 billion invested by venture capitalists since the beginning of the year. Over the past month, the most active countries were the Netherlands, the USA, and Canada. Most active meaning that it's in terms of news announcements. So it can be funding round completion, new innovations, new vertical farming facilities, new technologies, new products or services announced by by local companies. And as well, other countries and regions can be mentioned, such as the UK, the Baltic region, and Southeast Asia, where there's a lot going on, as well as the Middle East. In the other data that we've been able to collect, in June, we've recorded an IPO that has gone today, actually, from Calera and their merger with iGrow, and a planned IPO from Sky Urban Technology, which is a Singapore-based urban agriculture company. They're planning an IPO. Overall, the main innovation announcements or new products that were put on the market by vertical farming companies were aimed at decreasing energy consumptions and automating farms. That's what we've been seeing. And also the main purpose of the partnerships that were announced were to distribute the products and or services, thus proving that the industry is growing and is expanding to other ventures and countries. However, even though the industry is growing, that we're seeing positive signs, both on financial markets, despite everything that is going around, despite the global supply chain disruptions, there are a set of challenges that is facing this industry. First of all, there is a regulation gap. Vertical farming being quite new and quite disruptive, certain zoning laws and urban planning / community regulations are definitely not adapted to such technology. You have examples in the USA, in Canada, in Europe, and in also other regions of the world where the regulations in place are definitely not adapted to vertical farms. And that in turn slows down their growth process and the adoption rate of vertical farms throughout these countries. There's been a recent report done on AgFounder News about it. Also, there is a debate going on in the United States. We're seeing also a debate here in Europe on whether we should consider vertical farming produce as organic. The reason being that organic, according to the regulations, comes from in-field growing processes. So a lot of people question whether it is adapted to vertical farms or whether we should adopt a new label or system to consider what would be sustainable produce, for instance. So these are two examples of regulation gaps, but there are others as well. You also have an energy problem. It comes from, with no surprise, that the current war between Russia and Ukraine, shooting the energy prices up, has further pressured certain vertical farms and much larger indoor vertical farms, as energy may represent up to 80 or 90% of their operating expenses. Certain countries have seen facilities closing because of the important burden current energy prices represents in their financial results. We're seeing countries like the Netherlands, like Poland, like the UK, France, Germany, closing some greenhouses, some vertical farms as well, because it's just not profitable and they would make too much losses. Some countries' infrastructures as well are not environmentally friendly and definitely rely on fossil fuel to power these vertical farms. Thus, we can question whether these vertical farms are sustainable, as the fact that they rely on fossil fuel increases their carbon footprints. We also see a problem regarding the labor and education. A senior natural resource officer at the FAO has recently pointed out in an interview with us that there are just a couple of good university and high quality state-of-the-art qualifications that are adapted to the current technologies employed in the vertical farming industry. These universities are mostly clustered in Europe and North America, and they represent only 100 graduates perhaps a year. So we can question with the growth of vertical farms whether there will be a problem in upcoming years and in upcoming months regarding the lack of qualified labor. Also, most vertical farming operators have trouble finding employees and training them accordingly. There are also some vertical farming operators that have been accused of underpaying labor and refusing any type of union within their. Last but not least, we see a lot of problems regarding transparency and also undergoing investigations against vertical farming. Many publicly traded vertical farms are under investigations currently because for the following reasons. We're seeing misleading shareholders, failing to disclose appropriately the true capacity of vertical farms, failing to comply with security and commission regulations, among other points. Also, recently, the 2021 Global CEA Census from Agriculture has pointed out that vertical farming operators or equipment suppliers do not display the true cost of operating their vertical farms. Thus, it hampers their profitability rates, and it also misleads future clients and prospective clients. There is also a problem because there is no industry-wide standards on how to account for the number of produce, for the rate of produce, for the profitability of certain farms, and comparing these farms, as vertical farming can be very different from greenhouse farming because it has its own sets of challenges and its own advantages. So this was just to give a little overview of the vertical farming industry as a whole. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Seb, for your objective business insights on the world of vertical farming. I know I appreciate the fact that you went into both the good and the bad. I feel like that's a conversation that we need to have, and I'm glad that you were able to highlight that so effectively. If anybody has any questions for Seb, he'll be answering them at the end of the webinar, so just feel free to drop those in the chat, and then we'll just address them at the end. Next up, we have Juan Gabriel Sacar with Hufster by Verde Compacto. Juan is the co-founder and CCO of Hufster. His company is transforming the way we produce and consume our food by building a farm-to-table food chain that cultivates fresh and delicious vegetables year-round. Today, Juan will be discussing an easy way to start and grow in vertical farming with Hufster.
Thanks a lot, Natalie. Well, hello guys. A lot of familiar faces. Thanks to join. Well, as Natalie said, our company is called Verde Compacto. We will be telling you guys how do we help growers enter to this industry and help them grow to manage some of the challenges that Sefer was talking about, and also taking the opportunities that he told a few minutes ago. For interesting conversation and data analysis from iGrow. So yeah, please, all the questions you have, please, if you can write it down in the chat so we can answer them at the end of the webinar. We'll be happy to answer them for you. So yeah, welcome guys. As we say, welcome to the new era of agriculture. Welcome to Verde Compacto. A quick, well, we start with a quick overview. As Seth said, I don't want to go to get in very detailed with this, but one of the main things that is pushing vertical farming industry around the world is all the problems we're having with traditional agriculture, supply chain, water, agrotoxics, and the growth of population. And that is why vertical farming is being more relevant and is being pushed in the last years because of the pandemic, because of the war in Ukraine. And there's a very interesting quote by Singularity University that is predicting that by 2026, in a couple of years, indoor vertical agriculture will be the basis for the production of fresh vegetables that will be consumed in large cities around the world. Again, because of these challenges we're facing today. And basically, that is why we got and we created Verde Compacto on our company, which is that basically our mission of being here is to make vertical farming more accessible for people and companies get involved into this industry to help this transformation of our food supply chain for a more sustainable and a more healthy food for the people around. Well, I will tell you more about how we're doing it. But this is very relevant. Why is accessibility very important for this industry? One, because these are the three key challenges we've seen over the last years working with different projects to have. So these are key elements to have a successful vertical farming project anywhere in the world, basically. One of the key ingredients to have a successful project here is to choose and to select a high productive technological system that can be reliable, that can work smoothly, and that can work perfectly 365 days a year. And productivity is a very, very important point to choose and to look for when you will select vertical farming technology or solution. The second thing to consider in your project, or if you want to get into this market or to grow, is very important that you can have access to added value markets that can pay premium or products that can have an additional differentiator from traditional products. This will help a lot on making more profitable your projects and start having a successful project with this. That's why we've seen here a lot of projects fail on their early stages because they don't have the right market for their products. So it's very important to select the right market to sell your products to, and to get a really important and to transmit and market a good differentiator that you can get from your farms and from your products to the final consumer. And the third key element is access to capital. That's very, very important. Vertical farming can be very capital, it can demand a lot of capital right now because the early stages of technological solutions. So capital is a very key ingredient as well to consider once you enter this industry. That is why the mix of these three elements is very important, because if we select a highly productive and a reliable technological solution, and we have chosen a good added value market or buyer that can have and can buy our products with a good price, capital can be an easy way, we can have access to capital in a more easy way, because we can have better returns, better profitability, and we can generate more confidence for investors or for grants or for credits or loans. So that's why it's very important, if you guys want to get in the industry or you're already here, to take a look at these three key ingredients so you can have a successful project. So how are we helping our growers have these three elements together? How to place them together? Well, basically is by helping them start or grow in this industry by having a good equipment and a good farming that we call the hopster. The hopster, it's our indoor container farm that we've designed to be the most productive and the most accessible in the market. Again, so it complies with the elements of opportunity we discussed a little bit earlier. Basically, the hopster, it's a vertical farm, a hydroponic vertical farm that it's built inside a 40-feet reefer container with vertical hydroponics and with controlled environment agriculture. Combining these two elements, we can grow up to 5,000 square meters of food in just 30 square meters a year in the farm in a year. So basically, in the hopster, we have up to 286 vertical growing towers that allows us to have more than 5,000 crops at the same time. And well, this is a little bit on the vertical hydroponic system. This is also combined with a smart environment and nutrient controller. With this computer, we can basically control temperature, humidity, CO2 levels, lighting cycles in our farms. We can control nutrition in the germination area and in the growing area, so we can maintain the perfect conditions for our crops all year round. So that's why we can be very high productive, because we can grow more crops in less space and have the perfect conditions for our crops all year round. By having this type of production, we can also cut down and simplify the traditional supply chain by putting and now to be able to have productions in production of food where before we couldn't. For example, we can now produce high volumes of fresh food near the final consumer, and we call it that we can create a farm to table supply chain. We can either create it by a restaurant growing their own crops to supply their needs, or even we can install this type of farming systems for retailers on their DCs, so they can basically harvest the same day and put in the shelves the same day. And that way, by having productivity, cost efficiencies, and a good market, again, we can have a profitable operation and a profitable farm. Basically, the Hubster, how does it work and how can we achieve all of these benefits? Well, basically, the farm is divided into two areas. The first area, where you see number 1, 2, and 3, is basically our germination and working station. And whereas 4 and 5, it's our growing area. Well, this is very important. The Hubster, the container itself isolates the climate inside and the environment inside, so it keeps our production safe from any plagues or from any environmental conditions at the outside. Also, we have the germination table and working station, where we can produce or harvest from the seed to the harvest, all right here. The germination table is very important because we can prevent any diseases or plagues to come inside our farm by maintaining all the process inside. We can also schedule up our harvests from the seed. An example is that we can germinate every day, so we can harvest every day, or we can harvest every week, so we can have weekly harvests and deliveries, so we can adapt to our final client needs. And you can see number 2, we have this is the automated environmental and nutrition control system I was talking about. That allows us to control nutrients as well in both sides, in the germination area and in the growth area. Well, and in the growth area, as I was mentioning, a different thing about the Hubster with other container farms is the internal configuration. As you can see like small circles in the inside where the vertical towers are placed. So this way we can increase the amount of yield per square meter, or in this case, cubic meter in the container, and the LED lights can go directly to our crops, increasing the performance of our crop production, giving more direct and indirect light to the crops in the whole growing cycle. So yeah, this is a little bit on how the Hubster works. A good question that a lot of people ask us: what can I grow in a vertical farm? Well, at least in this type of Hubster, you can grow over 200 varieties of vegetables, but mainly are leafy greens such as all types of lettuce, kale, spinach, chard, mustard leaves, etc. Some herbs as basil, arugula, chives, etc. We can also grow small roots such as carrots, radish, edible flowers, and microgreens. These are the most common type of vegetables that can be grown in these systems. For example, there's a highly increasing tendency to start growing mushrooms, strawberries, small tomatoes, and they can be grown in these container farms maybe by adjusting sometimes a little bit on the technical configuration, which we can also do. Now, a hopster, who is designed for? Well, we have two types of target farmers that we work with. We have for small scale projects, as we call them. So farmers can have self-sufficiency, such as restaurants, hotels, so they can grow their own crops for their consumption. We have also worked with traditional farmers, so they can increase their production performance by growing the seedlings or plant tools for them to transplant them to greenhouses or to their actual field. And we've worked a lot with people that want to get in the industry by launching a new business or diversifying their own business. So these are like the three type of people that we worked with to get into vertical farming. Now we also been working with more corporate projects for larger scale production systems, such as retail wholesalers and already established farmers with commercial operations overseas, such as in the US, Canada, to help them reduce their logistics and simplify some costs and have efficiencies on their supply chain. I'll go through in detail on some of the potential of the three type of projects we can do. We could analyze the registrations from all of you guys before the webinar, so we can explain more detail how this type of systems can work for you guys. Another thing about the hopster is that we can adapt, and part of our value proposition in Verde Compacto in our company is to adapt the technical solution for certain requirements of our growers. We understand that established growers or people that want to get into industry will have unique needs or unique specs that maybe in a standardized container farm won't meet them at all. So that's why we have the flexibility as well to adapt certain technological components to those needs, because our main mission is to help growers grow. We believe that if our growers grow, we grow together with them. But talking about the projects and potential projects we normally work with, for example, we have worked, for example, with actual farmers or actual vertical farmers, and we identified three main challenges with them. One of the main challenges with established growers is that they can have high investment requirements to grow their actual business. So we help them grow with higher productivity farms with lower investment. We can help them increase their investment performance up to 30 to 40%. Also, as I was mentioning before, these vertical farmers need specific technical solutions to optimize their operations. So we can build customized farms to optimize their actual and ongoing operations, so they can be more efficient on their growth. And we found this a lot with established vertical farmers, that sometimes they have some difficulties on finding the right spare parts for the farms, and a lot of this has been happening with the LED lights, because they are changing and evolving in a very fast rate. So part of our job to help farmers grow is a professional advice to renew these farms before buying a new one. We believe that if they have a optimal operation with their actual farms, it will be easier for them to keep on growing. So this is basically how we work with already established farmers to help them grow. For corporate now, another type of projects we've been working with are more large-scale projects or corporate projects with the retailers, wholesalers, etc. The thing here with this type of projects, we've seen that this type of clients need or have the problem that they have an expensive and very complicated logistics and cold chain. Cold chain is always a headache for buyers and growers for example, when we bring products from Mexico to the US or to Canada. This type of farming helps them to grow high volume products, really fresh, basically in the distribution center, so we can cut down some costs with this type of production systems and simplify all the logistics and cold chain. Basically, by growing inside their distribution centers, this type of clients can harvest the same day that they will deliver it into the shelf. Also, a lot of this type of projects, we've identified that sometimes, okay, I'm a wholesaler, a retailer. My business is not to growing crops. We've understand that, and that is why we offer a solution of farming as a service to help them operate their farms by delivering the fresh product in the DCE, and helping them taking away this concern of operation, so they can focus on their main business. And a lot of these corporate projects, they want to start with something small and validate the actual product before they can go big and scale up. And this type of systems can help them grow in a modular way, and start validating small and keep on growing as the demand and the business is growing in an easy and a faster way. So this is a little bit how we've worked with these type of projects. This is a small sketch on how can we integrate different units with a centralized operation to keep operations simple. And another type of project that we've worked a lot, and we're very happy to work always, is with new people that want to get into industry. We found in new people getting into the industry that, for example, they're not very sure on how to start their project. They're very curious on getting into vertical farming. They understand the benefits, but maybe they're not sure on how to apply it or execute it. So part of our process is to help them and advise new people and new growers on how to build a potential business model and how to validate financials even before they start investing. Also, this type of farmers, they don't have a lot of experience into farming. That's why we've been building a full support team with agronomists and technical experts, which we offer a remote technical and agronomical support for 1 year for the launching process of this type of farms, so they can have a successful operation. And the third important barrier we found with this type of projects is that the solutions out there can be very expensive. With this type of projects, starting can be more accessible, and it can help you grow in a faster way. So this I'm summarizing a little bit on the points on how can we use the Hubster technology in different type of projects. Basically, how do we normally work? As I mentioned before, our first step and our mission is to help you guys grow in this industry with accessible technology and solutions. That's why for us, stage one is very, very important. Even if you're a corporate project, actual vertical farmer, new people, a new project that want to get in, for us, the step number one is the most important one, which is the project's validation. And that was one of the things Sefer mentioned in his talk before. We want to make sure before anyone making any investment in vertical farming, they can have a validation on market, products, prices, operational design, etc. So when we start the project, it can be successful and it can grow. Of course, stage number two is executing the project, whether it's to building a container farm and ship it overseas, or building and transforming a warehouse with the Hubster technology, which is launching. And stage number three, which is also very, very important, is post-sale. As I mentioned before, in the post-sale process, we help growers monitor and give some feedback on their agronomics practices and technical assistance if they need some advice. Basically, the Hubster unit, to start with, it costs $99,000, and it has an estimated payback, for example, in the US or Europe, around 2 to 3 years. It depends a lot on what you will be growing and at what price you will be selling the crops. Again, so it's very important that you can consider these 3 key elements before starting in vertical farming or growing in vertical farming. Please, here is our contact information, and please feel free to contact us for any questions, any advice for your projects. We'll be very, very happy to assist you. And welcome to the new era of agriculture, and keep on enjoying this webinar.
Thank you so much, Juan. I really like the insight you had in terms of like the business of like, hey, like what are struggles that buyers end up having and how your product kind of solves it with the technology and everything else. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat right now, and we'll answer them at the end. Now, Harry Duran will discuss the significant role that vertical farming may play in the short and long-term future. Harry Duran is the host of Vertical Farming Podcast, the #1 podcast dedicated to the vertical farming market, highlighting founders and visionaries in vertical farming and indoor ag tech. Harry, the floor is yours.
It's on mode, and would you
How about now?
Now we can hear you. You're
Okay, good. And you can see the screen? Yes, okay. So thank you, Natalie, for hosting, keeping us all in line and making sure we get engagement from the audience as well. Thank you to Verde Compacto and the team for inviting me to share the stage, and I'm honored to share it with Urban and Sefer from iGrow News. I think everyone together is doing a lot of really good things to advance the industry. And I'll talk a little bit about my journey. And then what I thought would be helpful here is to share some insights. Because I started the show in 2020. And for those that don't know, what I like to tell people is I'm the conduit for heart-centered business owners ready to transmit their message on a global scale. And that's in alignment with what I do as an agency owner, as a podcast host. And Vertical Farming Podcast is my probably 4th show, if you're counting. I started in 2014 as host of Podcast Junkies. And I'm a huge proponent of the podcasting platform to open doors. That happens to be Ronald Shusett, who is the creator of Alien. And so I happened to do a 6-part series with him on it. So just a little voice out for podcasting as a way to expand to tell your story, because it's a very powerful medium and something that I'm really a big proponent on. My journey started for this specific topic in 2019 when I was gifted the book Abundance by Peter Diamandis, and there was a chapter and a little blurb about vertical farming, which led me to the vertical farming book by Dixon Despommier. And he's still on the list to get him on the show. He did give a yes via email years ago, and haven't been able to get that followed up. So he would obviously be someone, but obviously for a lot of folks here on this call, very familiar with this, and it's just really opened the rabbit hole, if you will, to all things vertical farming. So vertical farming, like Natalie mentioned, it started in 2020. We are now the #1 show focused on CEA, and we highlight stories of CEOs and founders of the leading vertical farming companies from around the world. And what I'll start to do is I was lucky enough to get some feedback and some quotes as I reached out to past guests and asked them for their thoughts on the futures of vertical farming. And because I mentioned in the beginning that I am that conduit, I love to set the stage, and I love to have, highlight the voices of people who have been on my show previously. And anytime I'm able to, continue to give back to the vertical farming community and to my guests, and to let their voices be heard, I try to do that at every opportunity. So I'll go through these, and again, if there's questions at the end, we can circle through them. But the first comment I got back was from Lisa Burwood-Taylor. She was gracious enough to be one of the earliest guests on the show. She's the head of media and research at AgFunder. Probably no stranger to most of the folks on here. AgFunder News is a really top-notch site for news about investments happening in the space as well. And she said the future should include crops with enhanced nutrition, circular, low energy systems, diverse workforces, and effectively filling food deserts, which is something we talked about. I'll also list the episode they were on. In this case, she was on episode 2. That was a topic that was near and dear to me, this idea of food deserts. And it's something we covered a bit in depth on her episode. Sam Norton, he's the founder of Heron Farms. And Sam says, I think the most important trend in the next decade is the integration of vertical farming into conventional agricultural models. Large outdoor and greenhouse growers are going to be using vertical farms for their propagation and stage plants. And Sam's story was really interesting in terms of the crops that he's growing. And I think what you'll notice about when you listen to the podcast and when you see some of the slides here is just the range of crops that are being tested. Obviously leafy greens, but just variations of seaweed, mushrooms, as Juan had alluded to as well, strawberries, tomatoes. It's really exciting to see where the industry is branching out. This is a three-parter. Michael is in the business of working on deals specifically for companies. And I wanted to include this as a bit longer. It's a three-parter, but he talked about planning, and Juan alluded to this a bit in terms of the work that Verde Compacto is doing with Hubster. And I thought Michael's perspective was helpful because he helps put a lot of these deals together. And Michael says that the need on the part of the project sponsor to recognize and understand that educating the regulators at the local level is critically important to project success, and something we dove deep in on this episode. From planning and zoning departments to the building department and community development agency, you have to have the buy-in from these key players. And if the controlling regulatory body is on your side, you're off to the races. If not, you can quickly find yourself being bogged down in costly red tape, which you may or may not be able to overcome after the fact. Number two, he says, identify your target customers first. This is really important. Don't just assume they'll line up to buy your crop simply because of a press release you've issued. And I think this might resonate with folks who are just getting started. Do your market research. Juan alluded this, and obviously Sefer in his presentation talked about the opportunities in this industry, and it's really important. The data is there, so do your market research in advance and obtain very, very key soft forward commitments from 2 or 3 strategic customers before you plant your first crop. And according to Michael, even before you develop your planting list. And the third, he said, having items number 1 and 2 in place and effectively demonstrated, what he calls papered up, will make your operation better equipped to obtain crucial working capital, which in Michael's estimate is 6 months of operating cash on hand at a bare minimum, which will allow you to get 1 or 2 crops to harvest and realize the sales revenue from them under your belt without panic setting in. So, for new farmers, that was really, really key advice. And again, that was episode 52, if you want to go into further detail in terms of that conversation with Michael. Stephen was one of the first people I connected with. He actually has a YouTube series. He now works at Farm Urban as a operations consultant, but his multi-part series on YouTube was really key for me for understanding like the opportunities for vertical farming. He gave me a long quote, and I just pulled out a piece from it here, but we talked a lot about the opportunities on his episode. What he mentioned was that it's sadly only becoming clearer recently, the ever-growing risk of food security, which is top of mind, obviously, with what's going on in the world today. That's no surprise to anyone on this call. And reducing this risk remains a primary goal for the future of vertical farming. However, I do believe this industry is on track to make a meaningful contribution to this problem in the coming years. What I've noticed as a trend across all these conversations is the emphasis that we're not what the folks in the space who are starting these companies, they don't see each other as competitors. We've talked about this a lot, that the need is so big that we need all hands on deck, and we need everyone, whether it seems that they're doing the same thing. There's no shortage of needs that need to be addressed in terms of food deserts and in terms of access to fresh food. And I'm sure this is something that my fellow panelists today would agree about. Bonnie Estes was on recently, episode 55. She says, going forward, I don't think we'll be asking about the future of vertical farming. It's just farming. She said, how do we produce nutritious, yummy, affordable, available food that delights people, period. I thought that was like a nice way to sort of summarize what we're all doing here, because a lot of times it feels like we get too bogged down into the technical aspects of it. But if we think about what our intention is on the long term, what we want to try, what we're doing is exactly what Vania said here, to just produce nutritious, delicious food at an affordable price that's accessible to just as many people as possible. I got to connect and meet Andrew, who is an early guest on the show, and talking about mushrooms. He's the CEO of Smallhold. He said vertical farming and CEA in general is a bet on a different future, a future where our ecosystem looks different than it does today, and growing certain crops outside becomes less and less ideal. Operators need to exist until that becomes a reality, though, and we'll find that companies with the right crop choice and approach will be the ones that can last until that increasingly inevitable future. So as I mentioned, we got to connect at Indoor Ag Tech NYC, and he's going to be coming back to share some new insights. So I'm looking forward to that. Scott Bryson, he's the founder of Orbital Farm, again, had a very, very long feedback for me. So I just pulled out the first paragraph, but we talked a bit about this on his episode. He said, vertical farming will continue to evolve systems designs, reducing the time, space, and risk requirements of agriculture today. The investment into deployment of vertical farming facilities will shift from today's venture capital funded efforts to much larger investors, such as institutional and green bond investors. This is necessary to allow the industry to develop lower food cost products, which can begin to feed much more people in much lower cost areas of the world, which I wholeheartedly agree with. As a wider variety of crops becomes profitable to produce within controlled environment systems, we will see a much wider adoption rate and supply chain risks reduced for many food manufacturers. Again, a lot of what was echoed in the first two parts of this presentation, but he's really intelligent and really with an eye towards what the industry, where the industry is headed. And we talked about that a bit in depth on his interview. Tobias Pegg, early interview, he's the CEO of Square Roots, and again, got the pleasure of connecting with him in New York last week. Tobias says, when I think about the future of vertical farming, I also think about the future of sustainable vertical farming. This is a topic that I noticed came up during the conference as well. A lot of companies make the same claims about less water, less land, but there are few actual hard numbers out there and fewer specific goals, especially when it comes to a carbon footprint, which is, without being overdramatic, of existential importance. So I think this is very common, and some of the conversations that I heard and were part of, and I was part of at the conference, was this idea of, as the industry matures, having these tough conversations about topics such as these. Ray Iruccia, he's CEO of Terra Firma Foods, which is in private mode and pilot, getting ready to launch. The future of CEA is needed now more than ever. Before the need for self-sufficiency in food growing with climate fluctuations, water shortages, and the need for truly organic food, not only here in the US, but worldwide. It's no secret that CEA eliminates the need for concern for weather, water usage, energy. And he talks about this idea of water, energy, and food as being the primary investments for the next 25 to 40 years, which I thought was really, really key. I've had the pleasure of having the team from IGS on the show, David Farquhar, the CEO, Intelligent Growth Solutions. Intelligent Growth Solutions has been on a couple of times, and I got to meet Andrew. He's the CEO at the conference as well. This was interesting because it's what we talked about as the industry matures. This concept of waste continues to come up, and I think companies who are taking the leading edge and being fully transparent, I think this is something that they will be honest about talking about. Andrew's point was that there's a whole debate to be had about waste, both inside CEA and along the value chain, that we should be having. And by waste, he means wasted food, wasted kilowatts of electricity, wasted diesel, and wasted cold storage gases. So it's not a topic that I see discussed a lot, but I think for companies that are looking to be fully transparent and educate the consumers on the benefits and potential downsides, I think it's going to be a conversation we see having more often. Samantha Johnson, she's the director of aquaponics programs at Commonwealth Charter Academy, and they do a fantastic job of educating a new wave of youth about the possibilities. It's not just with vertical farming, but they've got a whole charter program where they educate students remotely. She talks about the future of vertical farming being bright, with technology to maximize growth and a competitive mindset to make these ventures profitable. With shifting ideas on what farming can be, we're also reaching a whole new crop of students eager to enter the workforce in this innovative market. And I agree wholeheartedly. I had the pleasure of working with some of the team members from CCA. And actually, for those of you that are familiar with the Vertical Farming Weekly podcast, Noah is a graduate of that program, and he's very eager and been very happy for the work we've been doing together. So I think this idea of educating, it's a topic that I bring up a lot on the podcast, educating a younger generation about the potential for vertical farming, but also the ability to create and develop a workforce that's going to be needed for all these jobs, for all these companies that are being started. People, it's not something that we traditionally think is something being taught in universities, and I think that's going to start to change soon when people see the opportunities in this space. And just in the home stretch here, we've got a couple more. Viraj, again, happy to meet in person. He says, we see a bright, promising future for the greenhouse grown produce category. Growing produce indoors certainly has an increasing role to play in the future of sustainable food production. And while indoor farming may not represent the future of all fresh produce production, for certain type of crops, it'll become more prevalent. And someone who's had their finger on the pulse very early on, Viraj and Gotham has been an early innovator in the New York City greenhouse space. And I think what they're doing is really helpful for the industry and for being an ambassador for the CEA space. And then last couple folks, special thanks to Cultivated, who is a sponsor of the podcast. I'm very grateful for the relationships I've built with the sponsors for the show, and Cultivated is our current title sponsor. So we got some feedback from Kyle, who's been on the show before he was at Cultivated, episode 22. Kyle says the vertical farming isn't only about growing lettuce. As different cultivars become accessible due to research and technological advances, we'll be able to grow even more crops successfully. Another avenue that vertical farming will take is heavily assisting conventional farming practices, along with future prospects within the pharmaceutical fields. And to that point, that was a topic that came up during several of the sessions at the conference. The idea of the pharmaceutical industry sort of waking up to the opportunities that exist and partnering with vertical farming companies who want to specifically operate in that niche. And Kyle Barnett is now working at Cultivated as well. And Eric Levesque, managing partner at Cultivated, says, although indoor farming has been around for many years, more recently the explosive interest in vertical farming is driving innovations in all aspects of indoor ag tech with new creative approaches across the board. And what I couldn't think of a better bow than to say it's certainly an exciting time in our industry. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share the stories on the show and to share some of the insights from my past guests. And as always, when I can meet folks in the real world, it's always fun to take some of the photos as well. So this was Nico and the team at NetLed that I got to meet at Indoor AgCon in Las Vegas as well. So hopefully that overview has been incredibly helpful. Any questions for me, you can reach me at Harry at verticalfarmingpodcast.com. And once again, thanks to Juan for coordinating this and for the invite.
Thank you so much, Harry. I feel like I just got like a highlights reel of everything that's going to happen from like the top voices. So I know I'm really excited after hearing that. If you guys have any last questions before we start actually like reading them over, pop them in the chat now. And I'm just going to start going through, starting with how can we provide a constant delivery of food to our clients in vertical farming? Like, for example, monthly or weekly. And this is open to any of the speakers. Just feel free to just jump in and answer.
Well, I'll jump in. It's part of the operation of the farms. Basically, that it's by having a clear conversation with your actual buyers. It's understanding what do they need and how do they need them? How do they need the product? So that said, their buyers, for example, if your project is to sell to restaurants, maybe they will be buying twice a week. So, or maybe if you're selling to a supermarket chain, maybe they will buy every day. So that depends a lot, starting from the end to the start. So it's important for you to understand where and how is the product being consumed, so I can program a production schedule to meet those needs. And programming is the easiest part of it. It's just harvesting, because in vertical farming you can estimate the production time of every crop. So that's why the most important and key thing is to understand how it's going to be consumed.
Directly related to the crops, which are the richest macronutrients crops, or I guess like crops with the highest macronutrients that we can get from vertical farming?
Well, microgreens, that's, well, for what we've seen are microgreens, because of course there are a lot of products and maybe there could be a lot of discussion, but overall, I think what we research is the microgreens are very, very rich on nutrients, because it's when the plant takes all of the nutrients to start growing. Microgreens are normally harvested before or when they get their first original or real leaves, as we say, and that's the point when the seedling starts pulling up all of the nutrients and is ready to explode for growth. So probably microgreens should be one of the highest concentration of nutrients overall.
Yeah, just to second that, definitely microgreens is what I've heard as common in terms of nutrient dense. And then I think there's a lot of interest in what's happening in the mushroom space as well.
I guess directly related to that, it's a question that I have personally, having heard that just now. Kind of like, so we know that microgreens are like really popular, same thing with like mushrooms. Is there a particular type of microgreen that you guys have seen like a lot of growers decide to grow, or a lot of like success in the market? If you can share that.
I don't know, Seth, if you've read a lot of news about this type of things.
Where there are some types of microgreens that we often see either retailed or grown by vertical farming operators. There are mustard greens. There's also another one which I forgot the name, but yeah, there are different types of. There are 3 or 4 main types of microgreens that are often grown. However, there is also an effort to kind of diversify the types of microgreens, perhaps to more exotic and unknown crops that have as much nutrition and as much health interest for people.
That's awesome. I think this question is more of like a technical, like technology based, or just like system based. How to say water, or rather, how do you reduce water usage in an irrigation system? Or like in general, like with hydroponics, how is water usage reduced?
Well, there's many factors to water reduction. First is evaporation, because since it's in a controlled environment, there's basically very low water evaporation. That's one. Second is water waste, because normally in traditional agriculture, more than 60% of the water that is used is practically wasted because inefficient irrigation practices. So with hydroponics, you can give the water that the plant needs when the plant needs it. So that way you can save a lot of water waste. And third, there's a lot of indoor vertical farming systems that reuse the water. So the water that is used, it can be filtered and reused again. So that's another way to save water. And also through just adding an extra point for evaporation, there are a lot of indoor vertical farms that use the excess of humidity to concentrate it and turn it into water again and re-channel and re-put it in the irrigation system. So there's a lot of waste on how it's reduced, but mainly at least these are like the three most of the important ones.
So I guess related to grow space still, what are the major plant or human pathogens that indoor growers should be concerned about, or have you like seen issues with?
Well, from my sides, from the news that we've seen, the most recent and the most publicized outbreak was the Salmonella outbreak with Bowery Farming. I think it was last June. So definitely pathogens like Salmonella, also controlling humidity in order to avoid any types of mushrooms or crops just being affected by different types of like invasive insects as well, that could lead to other pathogens. And these are the types of these are the main pathogens that we have seen in recent years.
Okay, so while vertical farming is definitely gaining popularity in high-income countries, from a global public standpoint, do you think that vertical farming has a place in battling food security issues in low-income countries? Is it feasible to bring these countries to these questions? Sorry, to bring these technologies to these countries. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'll go. It definitely needs to be adapted to the country's infrastructure and to the country's also market. I mean, I cannot imagine a facility worth $300 million being implemented in a low-income country where people are battling for food. So it definitely needs to be adapted. Now, there are some solutions for it, perhaps in evaluating the necessity of certain technologies. We're seeing, for instance, a lot of AI automation and so on. It may be interesting to see whether having more labor in these countries would not be more cost effective than having automation and AI. But there are definitely some alternatives and some solutions in order to bring vertical farming in low-income countries.
Does anybody else want to speak on that?
Yes, adding a little bit on that, I think we have 2 points of view as well. One is, of course, selecting the right crops because they might be, or there are some of low-income countries that are located in food deserts. So sometimes for this type of countries, it's more expensive to import some types of vegetables from other countries that growing it themselves. So for this type of crops, it's definitely it's like, let's say, it's like the early adoption of these type of technologies. Again, depending on the crops and the cost of importing them to these countries. And as Efer said, the second thing is adapting the technology to the needs and to the infrastructure of these countries. But it's a matter of early adopters and identifying what are the most expensive crops and it's finding an economical impact to lower the cost and making food more accessible through vertical farming.
I also think that there's an opportunity for the companies that want to work and support these food deserts and these low-income neighborhoods. There's a lot of education that needs to happen. And for some of these folks, it might be their first entrepreneurial venture. So being an entrepreneur myself, like I understand there's a lot of ups and downs and you need to be prepared for them, and when you add on the complexity of maintaining and producing and shipping and marketing, this produce, I think there's definitely opportunities for folks in the space, if they're not doing it already, to help from an education perspective, or even from a network perspective, just to kind of connect these, again, thinking of a rising tide lifting all boats. If we move away from the mindset of competing with each other, maybe there is an opportunity for, everyone who's working in the container space to just, have a conversation about like, how do you, provide best practices for your farmers. And so I think there is opportunity for that, because at the end of the day, when these ventures succeed, it's helpful for the entire industry, because it's a good story to tell.
I agree. I think it's like, yes, as long as we as vertical farming develops, things get cheaper, like it becomes more accessible for lower income countries to take part in it. I think it should also be noted that it doesn't have to be as so when you think of like Aerofarms, these major big vertical farms, in a lower income country that doesn't have the initial capital to support that infrastructure, that may not be the solution, but it's not binary, right? So I know it's if you're in Africa and a remote village with like a very isolated village with low water and the soil isn't working well, a hydroponic system, a very basic hydroponic system with a singular solar panel could very much change and improve the way that people are growing in that village. So it's kind of even if we're not building these giant vertical industrial farms across these low-income nations, there are smaller vertical farming adjacent kind of technologies that can be applied there to greatly improve the communities and are being researched and developed. I guess if anybody, the next question would be, kind of in the same vein of how do the panelists see smallhold indoor vertical farmers competing against the very large operators like Aerofarms, Verde, and Calera?
I mean, I can go again. I think it will be the same thing that in the 70s and the 60s when we've seen like the first very large farmers and farming facilities emerging. Everyone thought that, you know, smallhold farmers will disappear, and now you still see some small farmers that have small acreages or a small production, but that tailor it to a specific community, and that like in France, for instance, you have these two different types of like farmers. You have the large scale greenhouses, several acreages or hectares even. They produce a lot and they sell to retailers mainly. And then you got the smaller ones that will perhaps sell it to directly to the end user in small market gardens and so on. So I do think that will be the same thing for indoor vertical farming. There are two different needs. I mean, there is a need for local produce, for quality produce, and there is a need just to produce, you know, to feed the masses, and also to feed like the retailers and the supply chains.
Yeah, that's right. More than I think, well, at least for right now and for the following years, and as Harry was saying in his intervention, I think it's not more about competing. I think it's more about growing the industry together, because the food demand in the world, it's massive, and it's growing in an exponential rate. So I think it's more a matter of identifying where you want to play and how you want to play, like to get this, like Seth said, get and be the best one in the niche you want to target. If you want to target, maybe you can specialize your farm into a certain type of lettuce or a certain type of salad mix, or you can specialize into certain type of restaurants, or you can target yourself on building a franchise of green bars or juice bars, where you can harvest where you can give the consumer what you're harvesting. So because vertical farming has a lot of applications, so I think it's identifying where you want to play and be the best one at it. And I think it's right now the industry is so big that I think it's right now I wouldn't say competition, it's collaboration.
And that's an interesting take, Juan, like you mentioned the juice bar, because it's something that people who are going to be creative. I think the people who have success are going to be creative. Not only they're going to have a strong partner to support them from the technology side and the production side, but I think, you know, the smart entrepreneur will also be creative from a marketing side. And so to the extent that they're able to go above and beyond, and as my guest Michael had mentioned, do that research, do that planning. You know, I think the quote about Abraham Lincoln, which I always butcher, but if you're going to chop a tree down, he said he would spend, you know, 7 hours sharpening the axe and then 1 hour chopping the tree down. So it's something along those lines, but you get the point. Like it's important to not rush into these projects, especially given the investment that it takes. And so, you know, just, you know, when I heard the mention of that juice bar, I was like, oh, from my marketing mind is like, yeah, that would be so cool to have like in the back, you know, the front a juice bar, and then the back is all the produce that the microgreens, the, you know, wheatgrass, if that's possible, just that goes into that, and then that's your offering. And then if you're smart, maybe that can be a franchise model for that someone, if you did all the hard work, that they can then farm out. So I think it's just putting, you know, your thinking caps on, not waiting for people to give you the ideas, but really thinking outside the box. There's no bad ideas, and I think what everyone has shown, and especially the iGrow team with their research, is that, you know, it's still early days. There's a lot of opportunities for people to branch out into specific niches. I think it's going to be really interesting to see.
Yeah, I just want to add on this note. There's like a juice bar, like hydroponic greenhouse that is like 10 minutes from my hometown. Super cute. Like they're doing great in business. in the same vein, in terms of marketing and everything, I worked at a microgreen vertical farm, super small. Like they were in a warehouse, like a small warehouse. They had PVC like shelves. Like it was very much like these two brothers started in their basement, and you can tell. But it was very cute. Like people were charmed by like the setup and like just the story of them growing this produce. And it kind of shows like in terms of marketing, like local. People respond to local. People want to know their farmer, and that kind of differentiates like big ag versus small ag. Like there will always be a want and a need to connect with your food to at least some degree. There's always a market there. So I know, at least in my personal experience, because I've worked at both small ag and like big ag, there is space for both for sure. I guess other questions that we had was specifically kind of like in an IT, like software context, like engineering context. How does one begin a career in vertical farming?
Well, I can go ahead in that. Well, that's a pretty interesting question because there's many ways to start. Again, it all depends on your budget, your needs, your target market. So it depends a lot of factors. I think the first way to start is to define what I want. What do I want to do? What do I want to sell? How do I want to market my crops? And how much access to capital can I have to start? Because I've known projects that they've started, as you said, in the basement with small scale farm, and they've been growing every year. Now they have massive productions. And I heard other stories, the opposite, that they invested a farm $50 million in their first farm, and they've been growing. So it's all a matter on defining your business model and identifying your target market. I think that's the most important thing. And depending on that, and the third component, capital, and depending on those elements, as we said in our intervention, is to choose the right technological solution for that. It can either be a container farm, it can either be a small scale farm, it can either be a massive farm, or it can even be a simple hydroponic greenhouse. So that's how we normally recommend or growers to start.
Do you guys have advice more in the context of like a traditional, like working at a big industrial vertical farm? So opposed to like starting your own business, like literally like jumping ship for whatever job you have to like an industrial farm.
Well, we've had experience in that. It's more, we call it diversifying your production. And to be honest, people or business that go like that are the ones that already have a captive market. The people that normally jump in like that aggressively are the ones that already have the buyers, large scale buyers. And having the large scale buyers allows you to reduce your risk on investing. So that's why you could invest higher amounts of money. So those are the diversification. That's why we call it the diversifications, because these massive investments have been made with lower risks, at least from what we've seen. I've heard, I haven't heard at least myself from other projects that invest massive amounts of money without being at least connected in the industry.
I know for me personally, because I just started my career in vertical farming like 2 years ago, and I don't really have a farm, right? I'm here, I'm seeing this woman. I don't have a farm. I'm in the media side of things. But for me, it was very much like reaching out to like hydroponics / controlled environment farms near me. Like literally like within half an hour of my house, there were like two. So I just like reached out to them and was like, hey, like I'd love to learn more about your systems. I think it's a very big thing, like just starting conversations with people in vertical farming. In this industry, I haven't met a single person that doesn't like absolutely love what they do. Like everybody's so excited and passionate and loves to talk about it. So in terms of like starting a career, in my experience, literally just like start those conversations, like meet people, find out what part of the industry you want to jump into, and then kind of just like either like work it on your own. Like I know I started hydroponics in my little like closet, like my bedroom closet. It's hard, but it's hard to get right, but it's easy to start. And that's kind of just like the thing that you can do, just learn as much as you can, get your hands on it, and then like go from there. I think as if anybody has more questions, I think I've got one more. So feel free to drop those in before
I
I
just
ask.
want to echo what Natalie was saying, and I think what's interesting at coming at it from the podcast industry perspective, what you've noticed start to happen is there's conferences that are geared towards the folks that are in the industry, and they get more technical in nature, and then you have a lot of the bigger brands coming in, and that's what we're seeing in most of the conferences. And so as Natalie was speaking, I think there could be an opportunity. And when you think about it from the creator side, on the YouTube side, podcaster side, we're all bunched into like the creator economy. So there's maybe something where, someone may want to take the initiative to create a smaller conference for growers, specifically just for the growers, not for the companies making the technology, or there's only incentive for smaller companies to show up, because you're not going to have plenty there, if it's just focused on people who want to start their own farms. So I think there's, again, just a lot of opportunities available to people who are thinking about it. But I think there is a hunger for this type of learnings from people who are just, from all the people who, the people who have jumped on this webinar, the people who are going to watch the recording, these are the questions they're asking, and so there's people who, may want a job in the industry, but people who may want to, have their own farm. And so that's a specific need that I think the companies in the space can specifically address.
Yeah, that's awesome. I literally had like an alumni from my high school contact me and be like, hey, like, how did you get into vertical farming? And I was like, oh, like I just came back from this conference. And he was like, oh, like, what is the conference? And I was like, it's $1,000 a ticket. Like, like there's definitely a lot of need for like kind of just a more like company to public conversation. So I think I can speak on behalf of the whole panel, and that like we're so excited that you guys are here and like having those conversations, and that you guys like showed up and asked these questions.
I could compliment just that answer. That's why Harry and Seb and you, Natalie, are here, because these are the type of places people need to access to start a project, to get informed of the industry. I think those are the baby steps somebody can take even before defining what they want to do. Start knowing what's happening, start knowing people that are already in the industry, get involved in the newsletters, get involved in the podcast. That's why you guys are here.
I guess on that exact note, do we want to, I guess, have the speakers give a final message or conclusion before we end the webinar?
Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks a lot, Harry, Natalie, Seth, for being part of this interesting conversation. I think there's a lot to talk about. Again, I'm happy you guys are here, because through your work, this industry can be growing, and we can give transparent and clear information of what's happening out there. And I'm very thankful you guys for your time of being here. Also, for all the people that are listening to us, we're very happy that you've been following up for the last hour and a half or so. So thanks a lot for that, wherever you are. And yeah, feel free. We will send an email with the recording of the webinar, with the contact information of all the panelists. And please feel free to reach out, open the conversation. As you see, we're very passionate about the subject. And yeah, we'll be very happy to follow up the conversation with all of you guys. And well, have an excellent weekend.
And thanks again to Juan and the iGrow team for sharing the stage. The show's Vertical Farming Podcast. I came back from the conference with another 20 names. So we're definitely proceeding and excited to share those stories. So happy to have you join the conversation. And any feedback or anyone you think we should be speaking. We had a great conversation with Juan on the podcast as well. So looking forward to doing more of that as well. So I appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to all the panelists, Harry, Juan, and Natalie for coordinating and mastering this webinar, as you always do. Yeah, and if folks want to learn more about vertical farming, they can visit our website. It's igrownews.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We share a lot of information, and yeah, we're keen to hear from you.
Yeah, in that same vein, I know Sep already did the iGrow news plug, so he's got that covered. Free resources. If you want to learn more about vertical farming, my YouTube channel is free. It's a YouTube channel. It includes home grows and also tours of like shipping container farms and etc. So yeah, feel free to contact us. I'm really excited to have been able to host this. Thank you guys for being so fun and awesome to interview. And everybody have a nice day.